I'd funded my parents' lives, but at a Christmas party, I overheard them mocking me as a low-educated freeloader. My world crumbled. I cut them off. The next month. I am Rebecca, a fashion designer, now 26 years old. My roots trace back to a small, tranquil town nestled in the countryside where I grew up alongside my grandparents, and Ashley, my sister, who arrived 7 years after me. Ashley, with her vibrant spirit, commanded the family's adoration and attention. Consequently, her opinions and whims often took precedence, and I often found myself fading into the periphery, accustomed to being an afterthought. A stark disparity in our parents' affections and treatment was always evident. On Ashley's birthdays, for instance, she would be showered with luxurious toys. My own birthday gifts, however, were often combined with Christmas, limited to a single, practical item, usually educational tools or books that held little excitement for a child. When Ashley joined the soccer team, our parents became fixtures at her practices and games, almost every week. I, too, was involved in the tennis club during middle school, but even on the day of my final match, my parents were conspicuously absent. Their reason? They had to drive Ashley to her practice. This pattern of prioritizing Ashley consistently held precedence in their eyes. There were moments I yearned to weep, yet the one who offered solace and encouragement was none other than Ashley herself. When our parents would draw comparisons between us, she would firmly interject. "That's not true. My sister is smart too, she always helps me with my studies, and she's amazing." A few days after my last match, she greeted me with a heartfelt, "Well done," and presented a small bouquet of flowers she'd gathered from the local park. Ashley had blossomed into a child with a truly kind heart. Meanwhile, our grandparents, who shared our home, frequently reprimanded our parents for their biased behavior and were fiercely protective of me. However, a shadow fell upon our family before I graduated high school. My grandmother passed away, and my grandfather followed her just days later. Ashley remained my steadfast ally, but her unwavering support seemed to irk our mother. She began treating Ashley more harshly, threatening, "If you keep defending your sister, I'll make you stand outside." It was during the biting cold of winter, as snow began to fall, that I couldn't bear the thought of Ashley suffering such treatment. I had no choice but to utter, "You don't have to worry about me anymore." Afterward, Ashley ceased her defenses, instead focusing intently on sports and studies under our parents' roof, seemingly enjoying peaceful, happy days. The consecutive funerals of our grandparents also took a toll on our parents, who claimed they had no savings, easily denying my fervent wish to attend university. I longed to study design, but my parents disapproved. Upon graduating from high school, I had no alternative but to seek employment. Still driven by my design aspirations, I moved away from home and joined a small fashion magazine company. My primary role was clerical, but I managed to persuade my boss to let me assist the designers. Working in an office, exposed daily to the professional designer's craft, was a stark reality check. Yet, that reality only fueled my motivation, and my dream of becoming a fashion designer intensified with each passing day. I poured all my free time into studying, returning home only minimally. When I did visit, I was met with nothing but cold words from my parents. Instead, I dedicated weekends to design studies, acquiring specialized knowledge through online courses and other avenues. Thanks to my relentless efforts, the company recognized my dedication, and I was finally welcomed as a full member of the design team. My passionate work ethic resonated with the surrounding designers, who generously shared invaluable materials and connections. 3 years later, I had grown to take on projects as a full-fledged fashion designer. 8 years after graduating from high school and settling into my career, I learned that Ashley was preparing for her university entrance exams. She was aiming for a prestigious private university's medical school. Ashley had maintained top grades locally due to her consistent efforts, and her admission was almost guaranteed. Remembering her childhood support, I wanted to reciprocate in any way I could. A few months later, Ashley successfully gained admission to the renowned medical university. When the news of her acceptance reached me, I was genuinely happy and immediately offered my congratulations. Ashley, congratulations. You worked so hard, going to cram school every day. Amazing. Ashley, with feigned modesty, thanked me, but then raised a concern. Actually, it seems a donation is needed for medical school. It's not mandatory, but Dad and Mom say it would be embarrassing if someone from the countryside didn't pay, so it would be better to pay, right? But you know our family's finances are stretched thin with my tuition and living expenses, right? Ashley herself had offered to manage her living expenses with part-time work, but the situation with the medical school donation was different. The sheer volume of study required left no room for part-time jobs. While a donation might be necessary, the reality was that our family's income, my father being a regular white-collar worker and my mother working part-time twice a week, couldn't possibly afford it. Attending a private medical school would be a significant burden, even with just the tuition alone. I suspected they might be counting on my savings, but I was surprised they didn't ask directly, instead having Ashley broach the subject. Despite my growing disappointment with our parents, I decided to honor Ashley's request and help with the donation and other necessary admission expenses. Thus, Ashley rented an apartment near the university and embarked on her new life. The apartment wasn't far from where I lived, and I was ready to help whenever needed. However, Ashley seemed to be thoroughly enjoying her university life, and whenever I reached out, her responses were always indifferent. Still, she frequently sent requests like, "I want to eat this," or, "Please send me that." Reluctantly, I arranged deliveries and lent her the necessary money, effectively taking over the financial support our parents couldn't handle. Although we occasionally shared meals out, Ashley remained aloof throughout, constantly engrossed in her phone except when eating. Any attempt at conversation was dismissed with a simple, "I'm busy with studies," and we rarely had any meaningful discussions. Each time I encountered her cold attitude, I grew increasingly perplexed. When had we started drifting apart like this? Today's meal also felt as if I had forced her to come, judging by Ashley's reactions. Trying to change the atmosphere, I brought up a light-hearted topic about home. "Well, as long as you're doing well, Ashley, that's probably enough for Mom and Dad, right?" Upon hearing this, Ashley suddenly stared at me and smirked coldly. "Of course. I'm a famous medical student, and you're just a high school graduate designer. Dad and Mom aren't worried about you. It's a job that doesn't even require a qualification," she declared, her harsh words squeezing my heart painfully. "What do you mean by doesn't need a qualification?" I asked, my voice trembling. "Just what I said. You say you're a designer, but anyone can do that nowadays just by looking it up online. Even my friends can easily set up websites. Aren't you embarrassed to be doing such a job? Maybe you should at least get a certification." "Oh, but that might be hard for a high school grad. I've worked hard to get where I am in my job. How can you belittle me like this, Ashley? What happened to you?" I retorted, my voice shaking. Ashley glared at me with irritation and clicked her tongue. "Mom and Dad say it every day. They say that I'm outstanding, getting into a prestigious medical school, but it's embarrassing that their eldest is just a high school grad. They say the future doctor should take care of her sister so she doesn't get any more jealous. That's why I reluctantly contact you and dine with you." Those words revived painful memories from our childhood. Our parents had always compared us. Ashley is smart and reliable, while Rebecca is clumsy, stupid, and useless. They would say directly to my face. Those memories stabbed at my heart, and I felt suffocated, dizzy from the shock. I lowered my head to endure the pain. Thinking I was crying, Ashley snorted softly and said, "Well, I'll be going ahead then," and quickly left the table. With her new life at university, Ashley had become a completely different person. Their relentless extolling of Ashley, often comparing her to local geniuses, undoubtedly inflated her ego. Further reinforcing her inflated self-importance were the daily pronouncements from our parents, hailing her as a true genius, destined for a great medical career. Meanwhile, disparaging comments about me became a familiar refrain. Our parents' biased behavior seemed to subtly shape Ashley's own demeanor. At year's end, I planned to reserve a dinner at a local restaurant to celebrate my raise. When I mentioned it to our parents, they insisted, "Bring Ashley home with you." And I reluctantly agreed. Ashley seemed engrossed in studies and training, as this was her first time returning home in a while. Perhaps because of that, from the moment she arrived, our parents nearly ignored me, focusing solely on her. That night, they gathered neighbors, relatives, and even Ashley's former classmates who remained locally. A lavish spread of dishes was laid out, with ordered pizzas and a barbecue in the garden, and a grand party commenced. Just as I was about to address the real reason for the party by taking the microphone, my mother grabbed it and began. "Today we are here to announce that Ashley has been accepted into medical school and will become a respectable doctor in the future." Shocked by my mother's words, I tried to correct the story, but my father stopped me. Then Ashley, energized by the gathered crowd, began boasting aloud. "My mother wants me to come home more, but I'm studying at a prestigious private university and, moreover, in the medical department, so you must understand it's not easy for me to just come home. In medical school, we often need to cooperate as a team, not just individually, so if I alone return home, it causes trouble for others. Everyone asks me for help when they don't understand something, and it's a bit overwhelming." I quietly slipped away into the kitchen, pretending to prepare the tea. However, Ashley's boastful words still reached my ears. While it was inevitable that our parents and relatives would praise Ashley, it must have been painful for the neighbors and former classmates to hear her boasting. As Ashley's monologue continued one-sidedly, a neighbor, tired of listening, took the opportunity when I brought some drinks to strike up a conversation. "By the way, Rebecca, you're working hard in design, aren't you?" But Ashley and her parents immediately shook their heads and denied it. "She's trying, sort of, but not much can be expected. It's embarrassing that Rebecca is just a high school graduate. She's so different from Ashley," my mother said with a hint of disdain. My father agreed, nodding, "Yes, yes," while my sister, sitting beside them, seemed to understand that she was being praised, displaying a proud smile. In the room, there were many people who had only finished high school and were working, as well as parents with children in similar situations. While alcohol and food were being served, everyone tried to keep a composed expression, but it was evident that they were somehow enduring the situation. The only ones who seemed unaware were my parents and Ashley. I couldn't stand the unpleasant atmosphere and tried to leave without saying a word. However, Ashley stopped me. "You come back home quite often, don't you?" "I can come back with confidence because I study hard every day, but maybe you don't mind because you lack both academic credentials and pride." Ashley laughed loudly as she said this. Even though my father said, "Hey, that's not a nice way to speak," he was laughing a little too. I was speechless at her words and felt anger welling up. "Good for you, Rebecca. You don't have to come back next year," I replied with a trembling voice, cutting her off. As the people around us looked on with concern, I put down my tray and grabbed my coat and bag. While I was getting ready to leave, Ashley and the others were grinning and exchanging looks. "If you're going to say that, I'll do as you say. I'll never come back." A volcanic rage was stirring inside me, yet all the words that came out were cold and emotionless. Any affection I once held for my parents or Ashley had evaporated. When I spat out those words, the three family members waved cheerfully. "Don't ever come back." On the way to the bus station, I was desperately suppressing the urge to scream. Returning home had always been painful. When I was aspiring to be a fashion designer, I hardly went home, using my studies as an excuse. But as I grew as a professional, I struggled with the inescapable bond between parent and child. Ashley is much younger and still a student. It might not be easy for her to understand the hardships I faced since entering the workforce. However, my parents must have worked to some extent to raise two children, yet because Ashley was academically gifted, they continued to praise her as a genius while demeaning me. Their childish words still echoed in my mind. While I felt anger, I also felt a deep disappointment squeezing my heart. If I valued my work, I couldn't continue such a relationship, even if they were family. I was appalled by Ashley's terrible behavior, but it prompted me to decide to completely cut off my relationship with my parents. Several months after making this decision, as a new academic year was about to start, I received a sudden call from Ashley. She had not contacted me at all since then. She also sent multiple messages saying, "Please answer the phone." Reluctantly, I picked up. "Hey, what about my tuition?" There was a mix of fear and urgency in Ashley's voice. I answered calmly, "I paid for the admission fee, donation, and your first year's tuition." "No, I mean the tuition for the second year. The university is telling me to pay it quickly because it hasn't been paid yet for this year." "What are you telling me this for?" Ashley was at a loss for words on the other end of the line. Indeed, I had used my savings to pay for Ashley's expensive tuition, but what I paid was the admission fee, donation, and tuition for the first year. As a result, my savings had decreased significantly, and I had planned to make further payments gradually, so the tuition for the following years was, of course, still unpaid. After treating me so coldly, as if we had cut ties, to ask me for tuition was shocking. The only thing I was asked to help with was the donation, wasn't it? I only assisted with the tuition because I was being overly helpful. Didn't Mom and Dad allow you to go to a private university because they could afford the tuition, unlike when I was your age? Or did you apply without thinking about the money? That's not true, but living expenses and travel costs are quite hard because many of my classmates are wealthy, and I have those social obligations too. My parents helped with that, but they said they couldn't afford the tuition and told me to ask you. The reason I had financial flexibility was significant. I had switched to a major design firm to further advance my career in fashion design. Having established a certain level of success, my salary had increased dramatically. Moreover, because I was so busy with work, my salary and bonuses were accumulating rapidly. I had told my parents about the job change, so they probably thought from the beginning that with my help, they could pay for Ashley's tuition. Furthermore, they probably assumed I could also help with the tuition because they knew about the donation. So the savings originally meant for Ashley's leisure and wasteful spending had disappeared. Yet I no longer felt forgiving toward her. It would have been easy to support the tuition, but I refused Ashley's request. Days later, when my parents contacted me again, I rejected their offer. They spoke to me over the phone with panicked voices, sounding accusatory, which only sank my heart further. At that moment, I realized I could no longer return home. They were only counting on my money, not truly wanting my support as a family member. There was no reason to be exploited for my savings without any discussion. Ashley's calls became a daily occurrence, her voice often laced with tears. Had a single genuine apology been offered, I might have wavered. However, her words were always, "Please pay for my tuition. If this continues, I'll be expelled. I'm doing scholarships and part-time jobs, but it's not enough at all. What do you think everyone will think if a student as excellent as me gets expelled? I'll pay back the money once I become a doctor. We're family, so please help me." The messages left on the answering machine were all similar. Among them was a surprising statement. "If you're worried about not being able to come home, I'll tell them that too." After backing up these messages, I immediately deleted them from my smartphone. Then I sent a message to my sister and decided to completely block her contact. I think people who look down on others should not become doctors. With that, I severed ties with my family, embracing a new beginning. I later heard from a relative who had been asked for money that Ashley's tuition for the second year was somehow paid through scholarships and loans from various relatives. However, there was no longer any leeway to send her living expenses, so she had to start working part-time. Balancing work with a massive amount of daily studying, frequent exams, and practices turned out to be harder than expected. Eventually, Ashley failed many credits and had to drop out. 6 months later, I, who had been assisting not only with tuition but also by sending money home, stopped doing so after cutting ties last year. Without meeting again, Ashley, whose pride was completely shattered, returned to our financially struggling parents who were barely making ends meet. Although Ashley was academically capable, the funds for her education had already been depleted. Nonetheless, she didn't look for work locally. Instead, she spent her days playing games, venting her anger in isolation. I heard from a neighbor that voices arguing could be heard from the house at night. Since our parents had always doted on Ashley, they seemed unable to stand up to her. When I saw my parents in the neighborhood, they always looked exhausted. People around them avoided contact and hardly ever spoke to them. One day, perhaps due to excessive stress, my father caused an unexpected incident on the train during his commute. He made inappropriate contact with a woman standing next to him, was noticed by other passengers, detained on the spot, and arrested by the police. Fortunately, a settlement was reached, and it did not turn into a criminal case. However, due to this incident, my father was forced to resign from his job. My mother started looking for work, but having only part-time experience, she was unable to find a stable job that provided a steady income. My parents tried to contact me and even attempted to reach out through relatives, but it didn't go well. The content they asked the intermediaries to convey was reportedly intimidating. The relatives understood there were issues with my parents and told them, "Leave it to us," but eventually began ignoring their messages altogether. As a result, my connections with my family gradually faded, and I was finally able to regain a peaceful daily life. From what I've heard from relatives, Ashley, now withdrawn, and my father, unemployed and appearing disheveled, were reportedly shunned by their community. Overwhelmed, my mother had vanished, leaving no trace, and I could no longer reach her. The remaining two, bereft of income, were said to be living in near destitution. A supportive relationship with neighbors might have offered some solace. However, their past conduct made it difficult for them to garner any sympathy from the community. My career in design, meanwhile, was flourishing. I had recently been chosen for high-profile projects, a significant advancement in my career. This has prompted me to finally launch a plan I've been considering for a while, to take university entrance exams. With my finances steadily improving, I intend to tackle this challenge once my current project is completed. Looking to the future, I'm also considering starting my own business. I want to deepen my knowledge not only in design but also in management. I'm thrilled about this new challenge.